if my message to again anyone that's starting a business is that it's all about, scrapping, ham and cheese sandwiches, 7-Eleven coffees. That's what it's going to be like. That's the reality of it.
You're listening to the 9 to Survive podcast, where we speak to the most inspiring entrepreneurs of Australia. I'm your host, Alex Whiteside, the CEO of EasyCompanies. Running your own business can be quite daunting and scary. We're here to show you how to face those fears and help you build your dream today. We listen to the innovators, the game changers, and the thought leaders who have built their startups from the ground up. Hear what makes them tick, how they've overcome their own failures, and be inspired to take your own leap of faith and ignite your passion for business. So on today's show, we have Michael Buggy from Yegal. So he's matching law firms with paralegals and created a gig economy marketplace. He's been doing that for about 2 years now, and here's his story. It's great to have you in, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about your backstory. Like, what did you want to be when you were younger?
I wanted to play sport. I guess a lot of sort of startup journeys or founders you hear about, people selling lemonade out the front of their house. I was just chasing a football around the backyard, So, I guess I didn't really know. I kind of, stumbled into a career in journalism. I've lent towards doing, sports journalism, but over a few years, I guess I came to see that, the opportunities in media, this was sort of mid-2000s, were maybe not there. The internet was changing the way that we consume media, and I was working in television as a producer. And, over that period, I guess the internet, as I say, was changing things. And from there, took up a career in law, and over time saw some opportunities there, and now I'm running my own, paralegal marketplace. So it's, I guess, a bit like anyone. You have chance meetings, you think you know something, and then you give it a go, and then, I don't know.
And then it goes from there.
Yeah.
Did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur when you were younger?
Truth be told, no. I guess I was really longing for something that I could really apply myself to. I didn't, whenever I was in paid employment, I would front up on a Monday morning and look forward to pay review like anyone else. But in the end, I knew deep down that I wasn't really applying myself as much as I could. And I think having set up my own business now, you apply yourself. It's life and death without being dramatic. Your rent doesn't get paid unless you, make $1. So it really makes you pull your socks up and do your very best to get yourself ahead.
Yeah, it's a different world, isn't it?
Most definitely, yeah.
So then what got you into this business?
Yeah, so I guess it was out of my own experience working as a paralegal initially. And I guess for the uninitiated, a paralegal is someone who's working in a legal services capacity but is not qualified as a lawyer. I was studying to be a lawyer and working full-time at that time. And I was working in a law firm. And what commonly would happen is that, week one, I would go in and be, fully engaged, fully utilised, and then a piece of litigation or a transaction would finish and we'd have nothing to do for the next week. And I just found that really inefficient. I would talk to my friends and family, and I've got 3 sisters who are lawyers as well, and they had the same experience that I had. And it got to sort of 4 or 5 years later of me working in the law firm, and my younger sister, she was looking to build up her paralegal experience and find out what working in a law firm was like. And I said, look, I'll just give you, some low-level tasks, just to get a taste for it. And she enjoyed that. And she said, oh, look, I've got a friend that's looking for some experience as well. And I had a friend that had some, research tasks, and I physically married them up via email. And then that happened 5 or 6 times. And then I think on the 7th time, this was end of 2015, this happened, the 2 people wrote to each other. And at that point, I kind of thought, wow, this is something that not many people have explored, the idea of, the gig economy as it's described now applied to legal services. So at that point, I was really hooked. And I spent the next 12 months sort of, researching legal services and finding out where the industry was headed. And then after 12 months researching, I took the plunge. So, onwards and upwards from there.
Yeah, was it easy? I mean, I'm not going to say easy, What was the challenge in terms of getting a gig economy off the ground? Because you always hear people talk about double-sided marketplaces, or
Yeah.
when you've got clients on one side, clients on the other, or people doing the work.
Yeah, I think the challenge, putting, I guess, the sort of supply and demand aspect aside, is that a lot of people sort of amongst maybe our generation, they're of the view that a tech solution is always the way to do things. And I probably fell for that as well, for the first 6 months that we were trading. I had a white labeled project management platform that I would march around town to law firms in my network, and feedback was really positive, but conversion was maybe a bit low, and it was costing me money. And I spoke to someone at the sort of 6 month mark, and they said, look, put aside the technology and just go and talk to people, just ask them how they're using their paralegals, have them tell you about their problems and see what happens from there. And it was remarkable what happened after that. It's not about the technology and the solution and whatever else. It's just about talking to people and building trust that way. And that was probably the initial challenge that I struggled to overcome. And I guess the other thing that stands out to me, there was one major client or major opportunity that led me to resign from my last legal job and take this on. And the law firm that was going to come on as our first major client, the partner rang me up in the first week that I was full-time and said, look, Michael, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm actually leaving legal practice. I'm going to work as a management consultant. And I said, oh, what does that mean for our partnership? He said, oh, I'm not too sure. And I put the phone down, and I was just, I was devastated because I'd resigned on the premise that this fellow was going to be our first major client. And I guess it's sort of, it was hard for a few weeks after that, but you dig a hole, you fill it in. So you just have to keep at it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So you what was it like, that moment of quitting a job? I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, look, I rang my dad, I remember, because, he's given me some really good advice over the years. And I think he actually used the line, you've dug this hole, go and fill it in. And I think it was only a few weeks prior that I'd said to my mother that I'd resigned to start this job. And her response, she's quite conservative and these days very supportive, mind you. But at that point, I think she said something to me along the lines of, do you know what you're doing? And I said, look, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to have a good time trying. And she was really perplexed by that answer. But, 2.5 years later, I've built a business that's trading and onwards and upwards, and she can sort of see the method behind the madness now. So I guess that maybe comes back to maybe the point that I would maybe say to myself or to anyone that's starting a business, is that make sure that you've got people behind you that are in your corner, because, without family support, I wouldn't have got to where I am now. So
yeah, as in family believing in you, or?
Oh, look, believing is probably one thing. I think, to go and start a business for anyone, it's a huge risk. There's plenty of people marching around town with a slide deck and a spreadsheet. But, I kind of think you have to be very passionate about the industry and the vertical that you're starting, that you're entering. And I think in the background to that, maybe you need to, in terms of the practical support, to answer your question, my elder sister, Sarah, she housed me for the first 18 months of the business.
That must help. Yeah.
I was very, very lucky that she did that for me. And, it was a very small study that I was living in, but, it gave me, kept my costs down. And I think that's really, really important as well for anyone starting a business. It's a lot harder to make money than it is to spend money, and you really need to keep your costs down in that initial period.
It relieves the pressure, doesn't it, when you have that support? Like when I started EasyCompanies, my partner at the time was financially supporting like all the rent and stuff like that, because the minute I would turn to the company for income, it would just create so much stress and lead to like almost burnout on the spot. Like just that thought of like how's this company going to make money?
Yeah,
it really stresses you out. But the more you can relieve that by having support or investment or whatever it is, there's less pressure for the business to succeed, and you can just take your time getting there.
I think that's the most exciting part, though, Alex. because it's no one else is driving the bus. It's just you. I was in IKEA over the weekend looking at furniture, and I was thinking about $500 for a table, or what could I do with $500 to reinvest in my business? So, what could, and it's a discussion that you have with yourself every day, but it's actually exciting because, you're driving, you're in charge of your own destiny. It's like choose your own adventure. It's like those books that we used to read as kids, but played out in real life. So yeah, that's, I guess, how I kind of look at things, and it sounds like you.
Yeah, you have to be smart about your spending, as you say, especially like before the business gets off the ground, and there's that, like once you can actually start paying yourself a salary, that should be the first goal eventually, is like that you can pay yourself a salary, but it's getting to that point.
Yeah, most definitely. It's it's an interesting challenge drawing salary out of the business, because it obviously comes with opportunity cost. So again, something that I maybe struggle with every day. But yeah.
It's a good point to pivot into, actually. Have you ever had moments that you haven't wanted to work on the business anymore, or just like those moments of faith, as I call them?
Yeah, not really. I'm so passionate about the opportunity to do something in legal services. I read something just last week that said, and this was, a thought leader writing something on LinkedIn, the business model hasn't changed in 30 years. And my ears prick up when I hear that, because I just kind of think every other industry is changing.
Yeah.
Why aren't lawyers changing their business model? Why aren't they opening their eyes? And when there's such an opportunity, it's like I can see it. I've just got to reach out and grab it. So, and I think that's probably something that I, again, maybe would encourage people that are starting their own business. Just make sure that you're so passionate. You've got to have the passion, but you've got to probably make sure that the industry or the vertical that you're targeting, that the tide is sort of flowing with you. From a macroeconomic level, is the industry going the same way you are? Because if you're going to be pushing things uphill, you might come across some challenges. So yeah.
That's it. I mean, we did a live stream the other day talking about your why, and like why it is you're running business and you're in a business, because if that's not aligned, it's gonna just drive you crazy in the end. Like if your why is off, or it's not a real reason to be running a business, then that's what gets you out of bed on those days. Like that's what gets you out, gets you motivated.
Yeah, I think for me it's about learning. You learn so much. I'd love to do this 2 or 3 times, and apply what I've learned through this first business into a future business. And I think just that is what it comes down to for me. As an employee, you can progress and you can create opportunities yourself, but it's such a different lifestyle, and it's all about learning, I guess, in the end for me.
I think that's a good point, because it's redefining our benchmark for success.
Yeah.
And it's like in business, is a successful business one that exits and sells? Potentially, but not necessarily, because I've had 3 businesses that to those means have failed, but they've actually been the biggest learnings and the biggest lessons.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much from not having a successful, or even making profit, just learning how to structure things, or learning from those mistakes, as I could call them.
Yeah.
So.
It's a really good point. I think I listened to a podcast about 6 months ago, and it was a woman that was in her heyday one of Australia's first leading triathletes. She was going to participate in, I think, the 1996 Olympics, and she was hit by a car on the eve of the Atlanta Games, and she was paraplegic, had to teach herself how to walk again, and now she's built a successful corporate career, and has bounced back amazingly well from that. And she was interviewed and said, what was it that allowed you to overcome those sort of setbacks, that would be so significant to anyone else? And she was able to narrow it down to one thing. She said that when we were kids, we would sit around the dinner table and Dad would say to us, what did you fail at today? And through the ability to sort of embrace failure, you're able to overcome setbacks so much, it's so much easier. And it really sort of resonated with me, because maybe, I don't have kids yet, but, your parents are always maybe trying to encourage you to play it safe a little bit. But these days I kind of think people have got to open the door and take a risk and see what happens. So
especially in Australia, I don't know. It seems we're more risk averse than other.
Well, I guess I listen to a lot of podcasts about that as well, and maybe it's got something to do with the fact that we've had, uninterrupted economic prosperity for so many years. But I think that's the platform for anyone to really want to take a risk. I think, where we're highly educated as a class, we've got opportunities that are left, right, and center. It's just about having the courage to get up and give it a go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In that sense, it's it could even be said that it's the risk averse that has led us to that growth.
Yeah, a
in
little
that
bit.
sense.
I guess,
But,
yeah. We'll
but I
probably,
think you hit a glass ceiling eventually. You reach that kind of limit.
yeah, I think it is interesting because I've spent a bit of time actually at an event here. I met a group of Israeli guys a couple of years ago, and their attitude in Israel towards startups is so different to ours. You know, in Israel, I think it's compulsory to conduct military service coming out of high school or university. Yes. And what was explained to me is that when people go through that period of military service, you come out and you're ready to embrace risks and opportunities just purely on the back of your experience. And that has created an amazing startup culture in Israel from what was explained to me. And maybe the economic circumstances are a little bit different there, but I kind of wish Australia would follow their lead maybe in that regard.
Well, you see it in the investment portfolios, like US takes bigger risks over Australia, just those two together.
Yeah.
They're just more willing to kind of put their chips in and go, fingers crossed this works. You know, there is more strategy and more money behind it, but still they're just taking bigger risks. The bigger startups. You take your same business to US, potentially you're going to get 3 or 4 times more. You know,
that's interesting. I think I went to a seminar, probably, I don't know when it was now, but it was from a guy who'd raised, I think he had a courier marketplace. I'm trying to think of the name for it, but basically he was saying that the ability to raise capital and bring on investors is a lot easier in the US, borrowing on what you're saying, Alex. You know, he said he spent 9 months speaking to investors here, and they're very conservative, maybe a little bit unsophisticated. He said he went to the US and he got $800,000 from a guy in the fire escape of a New York nightclub, and I kind of thought, wow, that sounds like pretty. I said, oh, where did you write up the term sheet? He said, oh, just on the back of a napkin, you know, and a handshake. You know, it doesn't need to be the level of due diligence that maybe people come to think of here, but. Anyway, different strokes for different folks, and plenty of Australian businesses are raising money, and
it's coming up now, and I think we're moving into that territory. Australia's been recognised. So, what would you say then the biggest challenges you faced in getting the business off the ground?
Look, it's probably just your own personal resilience. You know, that's staying disciplined. You know, once you've identified that there's an opportunity and a problem that people have, and customers are telling me daily, you know, they're struggling to manage their paralegal resources. You know, workloads in any law firm, they go up and down, you know, with client demand. So on 1 week, they might need, 20 paralegals. The next week, they might only need 5. And that's where our business sort of plays. You know, we help them manage the peaks and troughs in workload. But in that context, you know, we've managed or are able to identify the problem, I guess, in that putting that aside, it's just more about my own personal resilience in terms of managing my own time. You know, on a nice day like today, I live in Bondi. I could easily go and walk down the beach and have a cup of coffee, but I know I bounce out of bed knowing that I've got 10 things on my to-do list that I have to do, and that's just the challenge of running your own business and being disciplined. You've just got to make sure that you've got that ingrained into you and that you're passionate enough. So, yeah, I'd say that's my main challenge.
Yeah, the discipline's a big one. It's because you're your own boss at the end of the day, and I think a lot of us, I can't speak for everyone, but myself, I left my job because I wanted to be my own boss.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of discipline gap, if that makes sense already. It's like, I don't want to work for someone else. I want to be my own boss. Then when you're your own boss, you have to find the discipline yourself again. It's still there. It
starts all over again.
That discipline mentality still carries along, and it's like, okay, now I have to somehow motivate myself. And
I think I've said to a few people on that score that it really takes probably 18 months of running your own business to really get comfortable, to come out of bed on a Monday morning and be in the zone, I guess, if you can call it that. And I think that's probably, if I had to speak to myself again at the start of my sort of startup journey, I'd say make sure that you have 18 months runway, because it will take you that long to work out how to get things off the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know, was that your own experience?
Yeah, I think to get the business to a point that I'm more comfortable with it. But I'd already run 3 or 4 businesses before that. But yeah, I'd say it's not going to be like a month later. It could. I don't want to, cast doubt.
Yeah.
But you're not going to be a month in and suddenly you're like, cool, I'm done. I'm just going to hire a team and it's all sorted.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and that's that overnight success mentality. You see all the other founders and you go, I just want to be like Facebook, and I just want to be like, it's going to just happen. I'm going to win the lotto of business. I used to have that when I was younger, that mentality, like it's a lottery that you win or something. Look, it's like you just get lucky and everyone's going to show up and be like, wow, this is awesome. But it's reality check.
There's probably a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, and maybe that is kind of prevalent among some of the startup media, that you just need to raise around, because even for companies that have raised around, Yegal hasn't, we bootstrapped to this point, but I suspect that raising around creates a new set of challenges, and they're the ones that aren't really publicized. And I think that, if my message to again, anyone that's starting a business is that it's all about, scrapping, ham and cheese sandwiches, 7-Eleven coffees, that's what it's going to be like. That's the reality of it. And it's not the sort of, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed sort of picture that maybe some publications are out there advancing, because it's just a little bit divorced from maybe what actually goes on.
Well, raising brings in different challenges. I'm not opposed to either.
Yeah.
It's just that it's like it fixes the problems of money, but you now have problems of actually building the business with that money.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's the money, go figure it out.
Yeah.
Now that's a new challenge. You think it fixes everything, it doesn't actually. Yeah. I've seen it a few people, but so really, if you cast it down, it's just that business is about overcoming challenges.
Yeah.
So if your challenge is, how do I make this leap here, even with the money, it's still making it, overcoming that, like, introduce a whole set of problems, HR issues, those kind of things that you don't have when you're working on your own. But when you're working on your own, your challenge is making money, right? So
most definitely. And I think that's a good point you make on the HR piece, because, we've just hired our first 2 sort of local staff to help me day to day. And, there's challenges in learning to manage people, and that's, it's daunting when you first start doing it, when you send someone an employment contract to actually work on the business, as opposed to the paralegals that are out like working day to day. And I'm learning so much in terms of how to manage people, and it's, I try and get feedback from the staff, and I'm sure they think I'm a bit crazy at times, but they can see my passion, and I think that's the most important thing. But coming back to your point about the challenges that you have, once you do raise the round, you've still got to do the same things that you're doing before, speaking to customers, finding out what their problems are. Those conversations don't get any easier just because you've got a 6-figure sum, 7-figure sum in your top left. So that's something that you probably have to be
So do you speak
of.
to your customers on a continual basis and just get feedback from them?
Most definitely, yeah. Look, there's a lot of people have said that you need to integrate this sort of Net Promoter Score and those sort of features into your business and try and get feedback into email. But I really like to go and speak to people face to face if I can. I kind of think that's where you build trust. In a lot of businesses, I kind of think maybe in startups there's a mentality to sort of go away in a dark room somewhere and build something, but you really need to go out and speak to people and find out what's making them tick. That's the reality of it. There's no 2 ways about it. So I do value those sort of engagements, and the opportunity to go and speak with new customers. I really jump at it, even if it costs me a cup of coffee or whatever, an hour of your time. If you learn something about what a customer might want, then you're a step ahead. So that's my
I think
approach.
that's it. It's learning to adapt your product to what the customers want, but not putting all the bells and whistles they want on, right? I'm sure you've had requests that you just say, no, it's not.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one, because I kind of think so many people, and this is maybe, everyone has an opinion, there's no doubting that, but so many people that see Yegal, they say, oh, you should do it this way, do it that way. And I kind of think the one thing that maybe a lot of people, maybe that are starting marketplaces, and I don't claim to be a know-it-all on that score, but so many people have said to me, oh, you've just got to build a platform. And in the legal setting, customers say to me, look, I don't necessarily need a platform. I've already got a dozen windows open across my platform at 11 a.m. on a Monday. Don't give me a 12th. Connect me with your paralegals quickly, but don't give me a 12th window, because I may not want to open it. So that's maybe something that I kind of think you only really find out by going to speak to customers and finding out what their real problems are, because otherwise, we're in a co-working space here. There's plenty of people that have got platforms, but if it's just opening another window for someone, is that really the best way? So I don't know. I'll be interested to see how marketplaces as a class evolve in the next sort of 5 or 10 years, because it's just something that I'm sort of struggling with as a business owner and leader. What's the next evolution of marketplaces? So,
well, I think the whole concept of work in general is changing, right? Like where it seems that way, that we're all going to be running our businesses eventually, or independent contractors working for different companies or something like that. It just, everything seems to be shifting, like whether it's a hype at the moment that everyone just wants to run their business, or that's where it's actually heading. Because it seems like a lot of people are like, I'm going to start my business, or I'm going to just become a contractor, or I want that work-life balance thing, so I can be my own boss.
It's supply and demand. Sorry to cut you off, Alex. I think in so many industries at the moment, I hear from friends and family who are saying, maybe I didn't get that pay rise that I wanted, and I don't want to be downcast and downbeat about this sort of thing. But if I'm running my business and I employed person A that I had a coffee with on Saturday, if I can find 5 people in that industry who can do that job for less than they would, then maybe that's what I'll try and do as an employer. And that's probably why when I speak to people that are coming through university, and I speak to 2 or 3 a day, because we deal exclusively with the law student paralegals, I say find a niche. If you're going to stay an employee, find a niche, a set of skills that maybe other people don't have, or alternatively find the courage to get up and do your own business. And I definitely think that's the way we're going. I listened to a podcast by the founder of Upwork, and he was talking about the Industrial Revolution and how, sorry if this is going off tangent, but he was saying that, as part of the Industrial Revolution, if you were manufacturing a car and you were putting the windscreen wipers on, you needed to be standing next to the person who was putting the windshield on, because, your job was intrinsically linked to theirs. But, in 2019, is that still the case? How many of us are sitting next to people in the office, and we only might speak to them when we step out at lunch or go for a drink with them on a Friday afternoon, and that's making people think, hey, is there a better way to do this? So I'll be interested to see which way it goes.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm keen to see that. It seems that whole, digital nomad culture is opening up, and everyone's traveling the world, running their own thing. But it's going to be interesting to see that unfold. So
yeah, for sure.
So what would you say your definitions for success is at the moment in terms of the business? Like what brings you, what's your kind of litmus test or your benchmark? Like, how do you know when you've made it?
Yeah, look, strictly speaking, if I was speaking to an investor, it's all about paralegal hours. We trade paralegal hours. We take 25% commission on every hour that we have someone in a job. So, strictly speaking, that's the measure of success. But, you have to sort of divorce yourself from that a little bit, because you can get very caught up in it.
In that particular metric, yeah.
Yeah, look.
So at a macro level, what would you say?
Yeah, it probably comes back to the learning. If I've learned something about a customer, or I've learned something about, what we could do, where there might be an opportunity for the business, that's what sort of drives me. If I stop learning, then I'd probably lose the passion for Yegal quite quickly. But while I'm still 2 and a bit years in now, it's always learning. I'm learning HR, I'm learning operations, marketing. You have to have many strings to your bow, and if you're not passionate, you can't opt out of these things. So just coming through.
You wear 10 hats a day, right?
It's
all these different.
Just coming to the end of the tax year now, having to get your tax affairs in order is a big one. So you can't shirk that.
Yeah, but, and it's easy because you think as a founder, like, I'm just going to give this. Someone will take care of this, but they still can't, because the relationship. Like, no one can just fully take your finance and embrace it. You still need to work with them on it and figure out all these other questions, like, should we be paying this, or do you want to do that? Or
is that, I don't know, it's maybe a question that I've asked myself many, many times, because I tell people, and I think lawyers aren't as open about this as they should be. Most lawyers study law because they can't count. So, in circumstances, particularly early days, I found, the idea of managing my, whatever funding I'd raise for myself in order to bootstrap the business, it's challenging, because people invite you out on a Friday, Saturday. Oh, I'm not sure if I can do that. You don't know what your own personal runway is. So if there was a means by which, people could train themselves to be a bit more disciplined, that's where I'd probably see some value. But I don't know, have you had that challenge as well?
I have, yeah. And I think my challenge is like, you're wearing so many hats and then you forget about that hat and you're like, oh no, the finance. And then when you're working on that, now these drop, it's hard to keep balancing all the time.
Yeah.
So you just have to get comfortable with not having everything in balance and in order, and just realize like, you want your finances the best they can, but not perfecting it. Like, it's okay. We'll figure it out as we go along. Just release the control a bit to like an accountant or...
I think that's a really good point because, and I was saying that to one of the guys on our team, last week, because you come out of university and you're ingrained to, produce business strategies and spreadsheets around expectations. And, a lot of it, I find it goes out the window so often, without being too dramatic. You could get hit by the bus tomorrow, that sort of stuff happens. Week one for me, our biggest client, our first client pulled the pin, that's part of the excitement, but you can't put that in a spreadsheet. It just doesn't happen like that. So
it's good to forecast and have an idea.
Yeah.
So at least you have your kind of benchmark, but yeah, you're right.
There's a balancing act, I think, between the two, and I'm probably being a bit dramatic saying, getting hit by the bus, but that's actually an example of something that I have brought into Yegal in terms of documenting process. If I did get hit by the bus tomorrow, I said that to our product guy last week as well.
Takeover.
Yeah, who would take over this business and run it? What would they rely on? We need to document every process, and I think that's probably a key lesson that I've probably only got better at since I've brought on these people, because I've had to train them up in processes. So it's been quite good to that end. Good.
Yeah, nice. And do you have a routine? Do you have a routine for balance? Like, how do you stay disciplined? How do you stay fit or anything like that?
Yeah, look, fitness is a big thing for me. I'm not, aiming for Tokyo 2020 or anything, but I try and, incorporate a lot of fitness and outdoor exercise into my routine. Bondi Beach over summer where I live is really positive for that. But other than that, I'm big into my triathlon, and I kind of feel you have to have that, balance. You have to put yourself in a position where you're happy to leave your phone at home. I find something as simple as going into a gym these days. You see people sitting on a bench or on a treadmill and they're looking at their phone. Like, surely you can divorce yourself from it for an hour just to clear your mind. And I couldn't think of any other way to live my life. I don't want to sound like I'm antisocial or against technology, because it's a very, very big enabler, but you need to find a balance. So
the work-life balance, you mean? Like not bringing your laptop into bed or... Yeah,
most definitely. Yeah, look, my girlfriend I have a bit of a go at her about that, but, I kind of find it's important, and I've read up on all of there's a few different, podcasts, and I guess with the internet, you can always find something that supports your view, but some of the blue light radiation that's, doesn't create a really good environment for sleep as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I've still got the old school alarm clock. Actually, about 18 months ago, a friend of mine, I was selling him this idea on the beach that, the old school alarm clock was the way of the future. He took some convincing, but by the end of that afternoon, he'd started looking on Alibaba about importing alarm clocks from China.
bring them back. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it was...
No, because you don't want your phone in your bedroom, right?
Yeah.
It's so tempting to reach over in the morning, pick it up, and just Instagram, and you could forget completely the purpose of today. Like, what do you want to get done today?
15 minutes.
Journal it down in 5 minutes or something, or meditate. Yeah. Focus on yourself, not the whole world and what they're up to.
Yeah. My rule is complete your exercise as a first port of call. Yeah. So, if I'm up at 5:45 exercising, ideally by 6, you can look at your phone as a reward after that. And that's... Again, I say that to my sisters and they'll say, oh, you've got a bit of a superiority complex. People need their phones to live. And I don't doubt that, but it's about your...
need their phones to live.
Well,
that's a discussion for another day, I think.
Yeah, look, maybe a separate podcast. I'd like to think I'm good at balancing it, without trying to force it on people. So maybe I shouldn't be coming on a public forum like this and spruiking my views. But it's definitely a balance. I think we'd agree.
Yeah. No, that's good. All right. Well, look, it's been great having you on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing the next few years at Yegal and where it goes. And
thanks very much for having me on, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thanks.
Cheers.
Also, if you haven't already, check out our YouTube channel. It's available under the EasyCompanies account, and there'll be a 9 to Survive playlist. So I hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next time.